Hi, it's Jim, the Iowa Tesla guy. Welcome back to the channel. I'm sitting here on a Monday afternoon. Just got back last night from a 1,800 mile road trip that we did in the span of 30 hours. Honestly, it was more driving than I would have liked to have done. But we had a situation where we live in Iowa. My son goes to college in Boulder, Colorado, and we needed to go out there and pick him up, because in that area you have to be out of your apartment by August 1st, but you can't move into your new apartment until 2 weeks or 3 weeks later. So what do? Well, you got to go out and you got to get his stuff and you got to bring him back. So that's what we did, and we had a relatively short window of time to do it. So we decided that there was hands down no question that we needed to take the Tesla, and thanks to a lot of the viewers and especially to the people that use my referral code, we were able to do this trip on Supercharger time that cost me nothing, and I very much appreciate that. But this video is to cover that road trip, and not just the nuts and bolts of the road trip, but also my thoughts on how do you get to where you need to go in a Tesla as quickly as possible. Because one of the stereotypes of an EV is that you take forever to charge, and how can you go cross country because you're always stopping and charging, and it takes forever, and it's longer than a gas car. And there's enough truth to that statement to give that type of talk credibility. However, there are techniques that you can use in getting to where you need to go as quickly as possible, and part of that is understanding the charging curve with the Tesla. Because when you charge, for those of you that don't have a Tesla, it doesn't always charge at the same rate. When you first plug it in, if you're at a 10% state of charge, you're going to get close to the rated maximum of the supercharger. But as you charge and your battery gets to 50%, above 50%, that rate naturally starts to taper off, and that's what they call the charging curve. And the reason why it tapers is for the health of the battery, and it just takes more effort to cram those electrons into the battery, I guess. But if you're charging from 90 to 100%, that's going to take you a very, very long time. And if your goal is to get from point A to point B, especially when you're road tripping, you never, ever, ever want to be up at that range of the battery unless you absolutely have to, because you don't have another choice. So this video is to cover that road trip, show you what it's like to do 1,800 miles in 30 hours, and give you my thoughts along the way. So hopefully you enjoy the ride. Right, we're on our quick turnaround road trip back and forth to Colorado, and our first Astra stop, I'll explain in a second, is in West Des Moines. We arrived 154.9 miles and had a watt-hour per mile of 276, which is actually really good. It's summertime. I'm finding summertime is a lot easier than our first road trip when it was colder. The reason why I put a little asterisk on this is our first stop, because we actually stopped in Iowa City, which is relatively close to where we live. And the reason why wasn't because we needed to stop, was because I was actually concerned about whether my car would actually charge. Because yesterday and the last couple days, something has been happening, little weird things with my car just stopping charging. And I've got a wall connector. It's been super hot in Iowa, and it's super hot in my garage. And I go plug in and it would run for 10 minutes and then it would just say stop charging, and I could start it, restart it from my phone. I tried lowering the amperage on my wall connector. I tried switching to my mobile connector. It still would stop. I did a reset of the car. I did a reset of the wall connector. I did a hard reset with the foot pedal, and that was about 11 o'clock last night, and it did seem to charge. I was able to get it up to about 90%, but I was really concerned heading out on this road trip today whether or not I had a charging problem or not. So we thought we'd get, an hour, less than an hour away from home and see if the superchargers worked, because if I had to come all the way here to Des Moines, it's 2+ hours back, and that would really have messed up our trip. Turns out it seems to be supercharging just fine. So we're going to sit here for a few minutes, go use the facilities, and then we'll hit the road again. So we are actually going to Lincoln, Nebraska for dinner, and it says that we need to sit here for another 15 minutes in order to make it there. Well, here's the issue. We're at 75%, which is a pretty high state of charge, and we're at 150 kilowatt supercharger, but we're only charging at 68 kilowatts, which is relatively slow. So I wish Tesla's nav would actually take into account the charging curve for a car, because what you're probably better off doing is sticking to a supercharger in between there and here, and there's one down here. I can get myself oriented correctly. There we go. In Shelby, Iowa, right there. And it's 150 kilowatt, 8 stall. And if we go there,
in 500 feet,
we have more than enough to get there. So we're going to unplug, go to Shelby, and then top off when we're on the lower end of our battery, and we can charge faster. So we're going to get unplugged and hit the road. Arrived in Shelby, Iowa, which is a western city between Des Moines and the Omaha area, and we arrived with a watt-hour per mile of 267, which is quite good. Only 91 miles for this leg because, as I said in my last stop, we are on the charging curve on the slow spot. We wanted to get on the better spot. We're still not great. We're still close to the part where the things are going to start dropping off. We're at 42% right now, and we're charging at about 150 kilowatts. But it's going to start dropping off soon. And our destination for dinner is the Lincoln, Nebraska Supercharger. And if I plug that in, it says that actually we can get there with 7%. So we're gonna stop here. We're gonna use the restroom, and by the time we get back, we're going to hit the road. So for those of you that think that sitting around and waiting for your car to charge is the thing in a Tesla, it really isn't. So far, this is our second stop. By the time we get inside and get back out to the car, we're back on the road. So it's really no big deal. Teslas are awesome. All right, we're all charged up. We actually stayed longer than we need to. It says we're going to get to Lincoln with 36%. There's a little park next door that had a little walking path. It was nice to check that out. It's a nice afternoon, and turns out we didn't have to wait for the car again. So we're going to hit the road, because we always hit the road. And next stop is dinner in Lincoln, but we're probably going to supercharge first. So let's get going. We're in Lincoln, Nebraska. Can't tell you what my stats are because I decided to plug in before I got the stats. But it was about the same. We got some Thai food, and it was okay, just okay. But we are headed toward our final destination tonight, which is a campground in Gothenburg, Nebraska. We're going to charge up at a supercharger there to have enough to ride out climate control in camp mode, because you got to be above 20%. But we're also supposed to have a plug-in there, and if we have a plug-in, we're going to be good to go, but just planning ahead in case we don't. So it's going to be dark when we get there, so we got to get on the road. Grand Island. We technically could have made it to our final destination in Gothenburg, but it said we were going to be there with 4%, and it really doesn't matter because when we get to Gothenburg, we got to charge up far enough to have enough for camping mode, assuming we don't have a plug-in, which I'm hoping we do. But if we don't, I'm going to need at least 20%, probably about 20% of the battery to get us through the night without hitting the 20% level for things to automatically shut off on us. So I got to get us up to 45% when we get there anyway. Right now it says it's -2%, so we're going to plug in and get going right now. 95.2 miles, average 305 watt hours per mile. A little high, but we were going 80, 81 miles an hour, so it's kind of to be expected. So I'm going to get plugged in and we're going to hit the road here shortly. Well, we're all topped off just here for a few minutes. We're up to 63%, and we have enough to get us to the next Supercharger, which is 14%, and then we'll charge up for camping when we get there. So we're heading out. Made it to Gothenburg, 102 miles this leg, 307 watt hours per mile. We're at 17% state of charge. Can't turn on camp mode until you get to 20, and there's no guarantee that the power at the camping area is going to work. So I want to have at least 40 before we leave here, or actually 40 when we get to the campsite. So we're going to plug that in and see what we need to do. But for now, let's get plugged in. Good morning from Ogallala. We made it from our campsite, and it was 88 miles and 351 watt hours per mile on this leg. A little higher than normal, I'm not exactly sure. It's a little cooler today. We started out under 70 degrees, so that might be the case. Might be a little windy. We had a little rain, whatever. We're gonna get plugged in and charge here. And this step, we are packing up our stuff, or as much as we can, before we make it to our next destination in Brush, Colorado. Now we got a serious Tesla camper there. We've got a Model Y pulling a camper with a car top carrier. I would love to know what kind of range they're getting on that thing right now. I got to talk to the owner of the Model Y that had a car top carrier and was also pulling a trailer, and I asked him what kind of watt hours per mile he was getting. He was actually starting in the mountains and going east, and he said that up in the mountains he was getting about 750 watt hours per mile, which I thought was a lot. But he says now that he's down here in the plains, it is brutal, and he is getting about 1,200 watt hours per mile, which is 4 times worse than we're getting in a standard Model Y right now. I asked him if he was able to even make it between Superchargers, and he said no, he's actually having to stop at Electrify America stations as well, and he's doing full charges. So that has got to be slow going, but man, he's brave, a lot braver than I am. Most of the time I'm doing the driving, but this time in this leg my wife is doing the driving. And if you followed my video on our big 3,200 mile road trip, I made a comment that my wife hated driving the Model Y. She has since come around quite a bit on that. We made some adjustments to the autopilot so it didn't auto lane change. I have that turned off myself. That makes a huge difference. But one thing is that we are currently on a construction area where we're on the interstate, and it is a 2-lane road. Happens to be following behind a Model Y right now, blue one, and she doesn't want to use autopilot because autopilot centers you in the lane, and when you're centered in the lane, you're a little closer to the oncoming traffic, and She doesn't like that, so right now she is driving like a 20th century person. Made it to Brush, Colorado, and we're going to be here for about 15 minutes. This leg of the trip, 122.8 miles, 315 watt hours per mile. This was a more efficient leg. Did rain most of the way, so we're going to get plugged in. Right, it's 5 o'clock almost, day 2. We are on the total trip at exactly 1,000 miles on this trip. Average watt hour per mile, 291 watt hours per mile. And we are actually on our way back home on this quick turnaround out to Boulder, Colorado. In fact, we had to do a quick detour down to South Denver and then back up to Boulder, and then now we're headed back out. And our destination for the night is North Platte, Nebraska. There isn't a supercharger there, and there's no way to charge there, so we're going to have to do a little bit of adjusting and planning to make sure that we ride that out properly, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But for now, we're going to get plugged in. Okay, here's the dilemma. We're sitting here in Brighton, Colorado, which is just on the east side of Denver, and it's saying that our next stop is Ogallala, but it wants us to sit here and charge for 35 minutes. And it's likely that we're going to get up on the charging curve where we really start slowing down. So I want to take a look at this, and up here, there should be one called Brush. And I've been there. We're there just today, actually. Let's see what happens if we go there. And right now it's saying we've got a 10-minute charge. So I'm thinking that if we not wait the full 35 here, get the Brush, quick charge, and then get to Ogallala, we're actually going to be sitting around a lot less. So for now, we're going to just get charged up to get to the Brush, Colorado supercharger, and then we'll figure out where we're going to go from there. All right, so we are almost to the Brush supercharger. We did stop for dinner, and what it's wanting us to do is to charge for 45 minutes at Brush and then go to Gothenburg. But we're not actually going to Gothenburg tonight. We are actually going to North Platte, a hotel in North Platte. There's absolutely nothing in North Platte to charge at, hotels or otherwise, so we're going to have to be stopping at North Platte, having enough charge to let it sit overnight, and then make it 30 miles or so to the Gothenburg supercharger. So even though it says that we're going to sit here at Brush at 45 minutes, we're not going to do that, because we know that when we are above 50%, we are slowing down on the charging curve, and it's going to get us to Gothenburg with, it doesn't say right now, but with a minimal amount of charge, but we need to have some charge to hold us over. So we're going to actually go from Brush up to a town in Nebraska called Ogallala. I turn on the superchargers there. There's a supercharger in Ogallala, and what we're going to do there is we're going to figure out how much we need to charge to get to Gothenburg, and then we're going to add some padding for sitting overnight at the hotel, and we'll turn off Sentry mode to minimize any type of drain overnight, and then we'll have plenty in the morning to take us up there. So our next stop after Brush is not going to be Gothenburg. It is not going to be North Platte. It's going to be the Ogallala stop. The more that I road trip in a Tesla, the more that I think that the nav system, even though it is great, isn't prioritizing in the right way. It needs to be set up to take into account the charging curve. And when I say the charging curve, is the bottom half of the batteries, generally where things charge the fastest, and then you get above 50%, things start tapering slower and slower and slower. So when you're doing a 45-minute charge, you are definitely in that upper band where you're above the 60, 70, 80 percentile, and it's just trickling in there, and you are just wasting your time sitting at that supercharger where you could be driving down the road. So if you want to, it sounds weird, but if you want to minimize your time on the road, you want to stop at more superchargers. You want to charge in that lower half of the battery, get you just enough to get to the next one, and go and do the same thing over and over and over. And that's what we've been trying to do on this trip. But more often than not, the Tesla nav is wanting us to do long stops, and that's something that I wish they would change. Welcome to Ogallala, Nebraska. This is our second time today. We started on the other side of North Platte and Gothenburg this morning, drove all the way into Colorado to Boulder, down to, made a run to South Denver, back up to Boulder, left Boulder and made our way across Colorado. And now we find ourselves here pretty, well, we're getting late at night, 9:30-ish, in Ogallala, Nebraska, where we are charging up before we stop at our hotel in North Platte. So we need to make sure that we get there with enough charge to last the night and make it to the Gothenburg, the next supercharger down the road. So we have that plugged into the computer right now, and we're going to wait until it gets to about saying that we can get to the Gothenburg charger with about 20-25%. It's probably more than we need. And from there, I will feel satisfied that we can get to the hotel, let it sit overnight, and then be able to get up in the morning with a cold battery and make it to the next supercharger. And if you're concerned about having it sit overnight and having the phantom drain, the easiest thing that you can do is turn off Sentry mode. Hotels are generally safe areas, but if you don't want to lose that couple percent per hour, I would recommend that you turn off Sentry mode, and then you should probably have just a couple of percentage loss, if that, in a typical overnight stay. So we are waiting to get charged up. We're using the facilities, and once all of that's done, we will make it to our final destination for tonight. And then tomorrow we're gonna wake up and push on home through the rest of Nebraska, over through Iowa, and back up to our final destination. And it's gonna be a long weekend, but good road tripping. Good morning. It is the next day, and we just are about ready to head out from the hotel, and I found something a little strange that I could use your help on, because I have not seen it before. Because I talked about coming into the hotel, maybe losing a couple percent as it sat here. You can minimize that with turning Sentry mode off. But one thing that I didn't expect is that the charge went up. I pulled it at 41%, and right now it says 44%. Somebody needs to help me understand how that can happen. If you know what's going on there, please let me know in the comments below. So we're gonna get loaded up, grab some breakfast, hit the road. Next stop is Gothenburg, and we're gonna it's about 30 minutes, so it's gonna be a quick jaunt, and we'll get to the next stop and head down to the road. We are back in Gothenburg, final day of our trip. This last leg from Ogallala to the hotel to here, about 89 miles, 301 watt hours per mile. And we're going to be here. The nav wants to take us here and let us sit here for about 40 minutes and get all the way to Lincoln, Nebraska. We're not going to do that. We're going to be here for about 15 minutes and then go on to Grand Island and do another short charge. Because again, we want to stay on the bottom half of the charging curve if we can, because that's going to be the fastest for road tripping. So let's go ahead and get plugged in. Arrived at Grand Island. It is 22% state of charge, 103 miles, 309 watt hours per mile, which is for running 80 miles an hour. Seems to be kind of the normal today. So we're gonna get plugged in. Next stop is going to be Lincoln, Nebraska, and we're gonna grab some lunch there. We are now in Lincoln. We stopped to get curbside pickup for some burgers at a place called Honest Abe's. Haven't eaten it yet, so can't tell you if it was any good, but it looks really, really interesting. Some custom gourmet burgers. And we are at about 94 miles on this leg, 305 watt hours per mile. Again, seems to be kind of the going rate. We are traveling across Nebraska at 80 miles an hour. And right now we're sitting at a 13% state of charge. Next stop, we're going to likely try to bypass the Omaha area and go to the next Supercharger, which we like better, which is in Shelby, Iowa. There's a nice kind of outdoor walking area, and the convenience store is really nice and close. So we're going to go there. So once we get to the Supercharger, we will plug in and go. All right, we are up to 55%. Our kilowatts have dropped to 110 as we're getting up into the high 50s. And according to the trip computer, even though it says that we want to wait another 5 minutes, it says we're going to get to our destination in Shelby Supercharger 17, which is plenty, even if we are driving fast. And so we're going to unplug and get going. All right, we are back in Iowa, Shelby, Iowa, at a really nice Supercharger, and we are here with 89 miles, 334 watt hours per mile, a little higher. Just the way it worked out. So we're gonna get plugged in, and depending on how long we stay here, we may stop in West Des Moines next, or we may push on to Coralville, Iowa, but most likely West Des Moines is pretty good stretch between West Des Moines and Iowa City, Coralville. Well, we are on our second to last stop. We are in West Des Moines, Iowa. This leg, 89 miles, 350 watt hours per mile. Things are creeping up. And we're gonna get plugged in here for just a short bit because we did overcharge a little bit at the Shelby stop. We like it there. And we'll make our way over to Coralville. All right, so don't assume all Superchargers are the same. We pulled in at the end spot because it was pretty full, and when we plugged in, we were getting a maximum of 45 kilowatts, which was really slow. And a spot freed up, 2 down, we slid over and we got the maximum of 135 kilowatts, which you would expect. And we weren't sharing, so I don't know what was going on with that last one. So not all Superchargers are created equal. All right, we made it to our final Supercharger, which is in Coralville, Iowa. Normally we wouldn't stop here. We'd be going straight home up into the Cedar Rapids area, but we are coming here to meet a friend. And so we just plotted off our course to have us show up here, 120 miles from Des Moines to here, 302 watt hours per mile. Pretty average for this whole trip. Got here with 10% state of charge. We're gonna plug in and see what our next step is. Well, it is 2.5 days later since we left on our big road trip to go out to Colorado and come back to Iowa. It was a quick trip to just go out there and pick up my son, who had to move out of his apartment, who goes to school out there. This last leg from Iowa City was a short one. We spent some time down in Iowa City, 46 miles, 257 watt hours per mile. But the big number that I want to cover is our total trip. In those 2.5 days, we did 1,824 miles, consumed 543 kilowatt hours with an average of 298 watt hours per mile, which overall is not too bad. So the goal in getting to where you want to go to quickly, as fast as possible, or close to the times that the nav says that you should be able to get there, is to stay in the bottom half of the battery. So get to a supercharger, hopefully under 10%, then charge from 10, and by the time you get to 50, 55, you probably have enough to get to your next supercharger with about 10% of charge. And at least that was my goal, and more or less it worked out. There were a couple places where we stopped for longer periods of time, not because we were waiting on the car, but because the car was waiting on us. And I kind of got thrown off a little bit in that planning. But I'm happy to say that on this trip back from Colorado, we got back at the predicted time, which is something that I was not able to do before. Also new to this trip was road trip camping. On our way out, we did a quick in and out. And in this video, I just covered the high points of that camping trip. I have another video that I will link in the description below, and right here actually, that will take you to that specific part of this trip, which was road trip camping. What do you need to do to set up, get in, get to sleep, get up, get out as quickly and as fast as possible? We're not camping because we want to enjoy the outdoors. We're camping as a means to an end to get to a point, sleep, get up, get on the road, and minimize the amount of road trip time as much as possible. And overall, it was a bit of a mixed bag, which I'll discuss in that video. But that's pretty much this road trip. And we're going to turn it around and do the exact same thing and then some in a week's time, when we got to take my son back to Colorado for school. And we're going to be spending some days out there doing some fun stuff for vacation. Hopefully I'll be able to cover that too. But that's all I have for this journey. So if you liked this video, please hit that like button. Even better, hit that subscribe button. Subscriptions really help drive the channel. And if you want to pick up a Tesla of your own, make sure you use a referral code to get 1,000 free supercharger miles. Use any referral code, but if you want to use mine, that would be fantastic. So until next time, safe driving.